Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon on Cybersecurity Reinvented, Elevate Your Defense with Qualys VMDR. My name is Nisreen Shams. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Business Development at Stratagem, and very excited to be putting on this webinar today. It is one of the most popular topics, so backed by popular demand, a big amount of Stratagem's current base and external to Qualys as well are very interested in leveraging VMDR for additional efficiency. So that being said, the agenda for today, we will talk more about what is vulnerability management detection and response. We'll introduce our special guests from Qualys. We'll also, time permitting, do a live demo of the product and also talk about how Stratagem can really help you extract all the value out of the investments you are making with Qualys. So to start off, the challenge of vulnerability management, I mean, it's very, very evident that the inherent tension in cybersecurity is such that every organization today wants to rapidly evolve, rapidly transform. But on the flip side of that, there is a big necessity to be able to have that robust, secure posture, and it's challenging. So the way we liken the problem of vulnerability management in our world is it's essentially an ever-shifting maze, right? So our networks are increasingly intricate and really host a multitude of hidden passages that can have a lot of lurking threats where you can't see. So the task before us is not merely to be enhancing visibility, which is table stakes in the business of cybersecurity, but to anticipate and where the next vulnerability may fall. So the solution of vulnerability management in the space of Qualys and how VMDR has come to package their solution, it's not just a solution. We look at VMDR as an ally designed to really give you a panoramic view of your IT infrastructure and security health. Also, the large goal with investing or working with VMDR through Qualys is not just about finding the vulnerabilities, but about fixing them with efficiency and scale. And with real-time monitoring and also automated alerts, your response isn't just timely, it's proactive. And again, this is the name of the game in vulnerability management. You need to be able to have advanced intel to be able to help you to get ahead of the threat. So with that being said, I'm very excited to introduce Russ Sanderlin. He is the Director and Subject Matter Expert for VMDR at Qualys. Qualys is a front partner of Stratagem's in the business of vulnerability management. We integrate it into our security as a service platform. Many of our customers enjoy the benefits of that today. And so Russ brings nearly 3 decades of expertise in IT and security to the table, encompassing everything from network design to management of global vulnerability programs, with a primary focus on ideas such as web application security, testing, network system testing, security monitoring, network vulnerability assessments, business process excellence, and coordinating vulnerability remediation efforts, which is a big piece of the whole puzzle. Russ has established himself as a seasoned information security professional, and we're very happy to have him on the line today. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Russ. We will have a Q&A session at the very end, so keep your questions handy, put them in the chat. And Russ, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. All right, so there we go. All right, so what is VMDR? So VMDR is short for Vulnerability Management Detection Response. If you've been using or familiar with Qualys for a while now, Qualys has been a company that first cut its teeth in vulnerability management and policy compliance with 23 years being in the industry. Initially, what we've done from our platform is create a place that you can identify vulnerabilities and risk items associated with your information security assets and bring that into an ecosystem so that you can begin to identify places where you can remediate them to reduce potential risk for exposure from vulnerabilities associated with your systems. Since then, we've grown significantly to include the cloud. We now introduce patch management. We have asset management, EDR. So we're looking to be an end-to-end complete solution for your cybersecurity risk reduction needs. I think I'll move forward. So this year, actually last year, we renamed the Qualys Guard platform to the Enterprise True Risk Platform. Our mission is to measure, communicate, and eliminate cyber risk across your organization with the goal overall to de-risk your business. So this is our strategy is to use our ecosystem to pull together all the risk information from end to end about your organization so that you can easily convey that to senior stakeholders from a quantifiable perspective. Good. Well, I'll let this slide here, not to tout that necessarily that we do have quite a foothold in a lot of American companies in the offering that we have to protect their assets. But this is more to speak to the experience that we have in all the various industries and verticals that are out there: finance, healthcare, even retail and automotive. We understand the challenges or the drivers for why certain organizations get into vulnerability management. Sometimes it's regulatory, sometimes they feel that's the right thing to do, so they're not necessarily driven by regulatory purposes. They want to understand what the cyber risk is to their vertical and what are the steps to bring that in. And of course, some of these industries that are more regulated, we understand what those regulatory drivers are and help them align the tool to their strategic needs, not only just to appease the regulatory bodies, but also continually reduce the risk for the overall organization. All right, so let's talk about the market landscape. And when we say market landscape, we're talking about what is it that our customers that we're having discussions with, what are they telling us? All right, go back one. Organizations lack visibility in the sense that when I do talk with a lot of customers and I ask them, like, how do you measure breadth of coverage? How do you determine, or how do you know that you have everything covered, right? And what we find through our analysis is that once we implement something like our external attack surface management solution and go through the effective measures of properly architecting their scanning, we find that there's on average 37% of the assets out there that they were not aware of, that they were not covered in their cybersecurity risk program. And as a result, 69% of the organizations will receive attacks from those unknown assets because they weren't able to manage them and properly identify the issues with them to go and shore them up and remediate them so that they were in line with the company's standards for protection. And we also found that 56 number, an average of 56 open source packages were identified on assets. So that's where they're building a custom application and they're pulling in open source libraries. These libraries would often get overlooked. And then 41% of open source vulnerabilities were exploitable with an exploit available on each of these assets. So the main takeaway here is that the attack surface is sometimes a little bit more complex than just looking at your local network. You have the perimeter, you have your cloud assets, even those assets that may not necessarily be immediately in your purview, right? If you have some websites that are hosted on external providers that may not necessarily always be in your traditional vulnerability management program, but that's still an asset that needs to continually be monitored and reviewed. And that's not to even speak of the divestitures and mergers and acquisitions of bringing out new digital assets into your ecosystem as well. When we look across all CVSS or CVEs, we find that over 52% of all vulnerabilities are marked high as critical. So that means that at least half the vulnerabilities that are going to come in are going to be something that would normally be rated by SLAs as something that would need to be, on average, usually taken care of or remediated within 30 days or 60 days. But this doesn't really, with CVSS, it doesn't necessarily communicate the risk in the sense of the likelihood of exploit, right? So we think of the risk equation, risk equals vulnerability times threat times business impact. The part what I'm referring to is the vulnerability times threat piece, the likelihood of vulnerability getting exploited. CVSS does a great job of giving the technical fundamentals of a vulnerability, but it doesn't necessarily speak to is that there's a matched threat to these vulnerabilities. So with this, we end up playing the volumetrics game where we're going after and we're remediating from a numeric standpoint, right? We're going to remediate all these criticals or all these highs within a certain amount of time, but it still lacks a decent method of prioritization. And also, this doesn't even speak to the context in terms of how does this correlate with the assets that these vulnerabilities are being identified on. Are they crown jewels? Are they revenue generating? Are they stuff that are they applications, or are they on assets that are keeping the lights on in the organization, or is it on assets that don't really have that big of an impact to the organization? So we look at the whole landscape of vulnerabilities, and when we find that roughly about 3 to 4% of them have a material risk to the organization. Right, we're talking about vulnerabilities that have weaponized exploit associated with them. They have an EPSS score that it's above 0.9. They're on the CISA known exploitable vulnerability list, or they're used by malware or ransomware actors or bad actors, or they're celebrity vulnerabilities. We haven't had a good celebrity vulnerability in a little while, with its own website marketing campaign. But those are the types of vulnerabilities that we should be able to start to focus on and be able to hone in on, because the number of vulnerabilities continues to keep compounding and moving up over time, where our number of resources that we have to remediate those vulnerabilities is not necessarily matching that pace. So what we're going through is to find a better way to measure this and identify, like, what is it that is actually posing the most significant risk to the organization. And weaponization, right? We talked about there's some vulnerabilities that are weaponized within a certain amount of time, and we're finding, based on the statistics that we're analyzing, that the average time for a vulnerability that does get weaponized is about 20 days. And when we look at our anonymized data from our customers, we're finding that most of the vulnerabilities are getting remediated in a month. So that gives attackers a head start of about 11.1 days to be able to execute on these weaponized vulnerabilities until, on average, organizations are fixing them. So the attackers currently have the edge over what we're doing with our business processes today. So the result. Undesired outcomes of this, the current cycle of doing things the way that we're doing today is that we're finding that organizations don't have an accurate inventory. They have a stale CMDB, and this leads to you can't manage what you don't know about, right? So then that leads to unintended consequences for being attacked by a system that you didn't have a focus on or awareness of. Security teams are focusing on remediating inconsequential vulnerabilities which don't necessarily move the needle of risk in the organization. In my experience, when we're dealing with volumetrics and in the Qualys vernacular, we have severity 3s, we have from severity 1 to 5, so familiar with Qualys, or more medium level vulnerabilities, that when you look at the numbers of those vulnerabilities, they tend to be a lot higher than those that are critical. And so from a remediation standpoint, it looks better on paper to get those big numbers down than necessarily going after some of the smaller numbers, even though they may pose the most immediate risk, which is why it's that a lot of our efforts of what we believe reducing risk by reducing numbers is not necessarily effective at actually reducing the material risk to the organization. And as a result, going after the wrong, well, not necessarily the wrong vulnerabilities, but going after those higher numbers, the teams may tend to miss the SLAs on the more critical vulnerabilities as a result. So, and then the other issue is that there's a lot of, in processes that are not as mature, where you're still doing vulnerability management by spreadsheet, sending them over the wall, sending it back, doing the rescans, a lot of that is inefficient, and there's a better way to do that and get that message of vulnerabilities to the remediation owners, the ones that can actually take action and handle this risk item. And overall, it just exposes the organization to unnecessary risk. So the solution. So the solution, we're going back to our measure, communicate, and eliminate, is one to measure known and unknown risks. And the key way to do that is you have to be able to discover all of your assets. One thing I speak to customers a lot is breadth of coverage, right? So just from the most basic principle of, let's say you're just doing vulnerability scanning of your internal systems. No, in your vulnerability management tool, hopefully it's Qualys, your tool should have the ability to scan all the IP ranges that are assigned to the network equipment, right? That's the very first metric that we work on. The denominator is your IPAM or some system of record that identifies all those open or all those assigned networks to your network gear. And then the numerator is based on what it is, what you're currently scanning in your program, and the idea is to get to 100%. Now we'll talk about cloud, public cloud. It's a little bit easier to obtain because we can actually, especially with Qualys, we can talk directly to the data plane of those public cloud providers and ask, hey, tell me what's out there. What's out there from an asset perspective or full stack infrastructure as a service, assets, so instances, or the cloud objects, right? The like S3 buckets or RDS databases. Those things we can also audit and get an inventory of. So making sure you have a comprehensive inventory of your internal, public, and then we want to consider the perimeter, which is super important. Going to Aaron to find out what your perimeter is probably not the best idea. It's a good indicator to begin to start with, but you need to know exactly what is on your perimeter from a network architecture perspective. So it's key to have that visibility through that initial means. Then using external attack surface management tools, then you can understand that there's DNS systems and public domain registries that'll tie some of those data points together to give you a little bit more comprehensive view of what's potentially also perimeter facing that you weren't aware of. And that's going back to that metric that we found before that contributes a lot to that 37% of assets that some organizations are completely unaware of. Get complete asset context and visibility. What we want to do here is to overall quantify risk based on that other portion of the risk equation that I was speaking of, which is likelihood times business impact. We need to understand what is it that keeps the lights on in the business, or what is it that is material and relevant to the business in terms of impact in if a system was to get impacted from a breach, what would that be? What impact would that have on the organization, right? So an asset that is revenue generating and facing the internet would definitely have more impact than, let's say, an asset that was facing the internet. It was providing an application for employees for discount pizza coupons or theme park coupons. Yeah, it would probably, from a reputational standpoint, but it would not be good, of course, without a doubt, but it wouldn't necessarily prevent business from happening. So just that's a key thing to understand from that perspective. And also identify additional security gaps from end of life and end of service support software. We can help you identify unauthorized software, missing missing anything, any software that's required to be on an asset to help protect it, such as EDR solution, and then identify open source software and packages. So just getting an overall view of your environment is key to being able to begin to, as your first step to defending it. And once you get an asset picture of what that asset scape looks like, then you can be able to use the tool like VMDR to identify all the risk items associated with those assets, and then use true risk as a way to quantify that level of risk to be able to assist you in prioritization and be able to convey that to senior stakeholders. Where is it that we stand in our current risk posture? And with true risk, so there's a couple different items that go in true risk that I wanted to quickly talk about. I mentioned that in the last slide. With true risk, this will help you prioritize one, the vulnerabilities based on using threat intelligence from a vulnerability perspective, but we can roll all this information up into assets so that you can take a look across your cybersecurity digital landscape and see that I have mission critical assets with an unusually high true risk score. These are the ones we want to focus on. This is where I want to make an effective business decision to allocate additional resources that I need to make sure that we can reduce the risk on these key assets that may have done something like fallen out of the patching program or may have gotten deployed without all the proper precautions. But I mean, ultimately, not necessarily trying to get to the root cause at that point, but just to say, hey, I've got risk out here. I want to identify it. So some of the items that we use in our true risk scoring is, of course, the asset criticality. And within Qualys, you can set a value of 1 to 5 for an asset, and we use tags to do that, which I'll, if we have time for demo here, and I can walk through that real quick. But basically, you'll be able to identify that this is a highly critical asset to the organization, or maybe you've got some student PCs in the back lab or something that may be rated at 1 or 2, for instance. We can also assist with that through our CMDB integration. If you're a ServiceNow customer, you can actually do a bidirectional import of that CMDB data into Qualys, and we'll be able to use that telemetry to help set some of those asset criticalities from an automated perspective. The location of an asset is going to be key. Is it external or internal? If it's external, we'll boost the score by another 25%. And also what goes in this is the vulnerabilities. If there's any compensating controls in place, we'll actually be able to adjust for that as well. What's the state of the certificates on these assets? If there's an expiring certificate or TLS or servers that are not set up in a proper way. If you're familiar with SSL labs, we have the ability to grade your certificates and your TLS servers in the same manner. So that also helps contribute to a positive or impact to your overall true risk score. The vulnerabilities, are they associated with malware? What's the exploit code maturity of those vulnerabilities, the misconfigurations? Are they being actively exploited in the wild? Are they currently being used by these actors for this purpose? Are they trending on social media? All these items, all this data that we're pulling in from our threat intelligence feeds, we're able to bubble up from an asset perspective to give you a sense of what your risk posture is across your organization. We use 29 sources. It says here on the slide 25 plus sources, but 29 sources of threat intelligence for this risk quantification, right? So we can. So the takeaway here is that you'll be able to prioritize your remediation based on likelihood of exploitation. And you're going from a vulnerability management program where you're remediating by volumetrics, by saying, oh, everything critical, everything high we're going to do in a certain amount of time, to now transitioning to a more mature risk-based vulnerability management program and using these items as a way to take the few precious resources that you have to make the most impact on reducing risks to your organization. All right, communicate risk. I spoke earlier about using this value that we have. So on an asset level, we use the transparent computation of these scores that we assign to each vulnerability, and it bubbles up into a value of 0 to 1,000 on an asset. So anything that would be higher on that score would be something definitely to be prioritizing, or anything that would be considered lower on that score. So similar to a credit score for your personal life in determining your credit worthiness, you would be able to use a risk score to determine what the posture of cyber risk is across your organization using this technique. And with this, we can help you build these persona level dashboards to have a high level overview for senior stakeholders that don't necessarily need to get down to the nitty gritty of what it took to get to this point. And you can even break it down to where you get an overall score of the organization, or you could gamify it based on maybe different business units or different regions of the country that you operate in, or across the world, to also see, all right, I see that this particular region or maybe this geolocation needs a little bit more help. We need more resources or cyber resources, or information technology resources to go there and help them out. That's a great way to kind of get a view on how to make strategic business decisions to help those individual places reduce the risk of their in that area. Of course, and then you can go down nitty gritty and as technical as you want in these dashboards and get down to more granular information about what does that asset criticality distribution look like? What are some of the most risky QDSs that I need to go after? Those types of things. And we also have a ITSM. So if you're a ServiceNow customer, we believe that we should be able to give you a means to get the communications to the remediation owners the best way possible. So in a lot of organizations that are using ServiceNow, IT people use ServiceNow as their day-to-day ticketing. Everything that comes in there, their whole world is based on that. And management evaluates and judges their performance based on how quickly they resolve tickets or how well they do. We want to use that same stream to also pull in vulnerability information so that they can take that in action on those vulnerabilities as well. And with our ITSM integration, we offer the ability to ticket based on whatever protections you want. You may not necessarily want to make a ticket for all types of criticalities. Maybe you only care about making tickets for critical or high. You can do that, or you can even use our QDS, our Qualys detection score, which is uses threat intelligence to create those tickets and be able to deliver those to the stakeholders as individual tickets, or you can even group them up and pass that along to them. And this will give them the ability to determine that, okay, this is something they can remediate. Can they status it as a false positive? Maybe they need to set it as an exception. All this can be done within these applications that we write that's included with the VMDR subscription. And the true risk report. This is something that we do offer customers currently on request, but it gives you a state of the union based on all the data that we pulled in for your organization and looking at different metrics to kind of give you an idea of what the potential impact would be if you were to remediate things. So one of my favorite slides in this report is that we'll show you a before and after. Like your current true risk posture is this, and it could be this if you remediate these top 10 vulnerabilities that we're finding across your organization, which pose the most risk. So this is something that we are building more into the product soon, but this is something that we can offer customers today upon request. Desired outcome. So overall, what is this coming to? So let's kind of land the plane here on what is it that this is the benefit here is that you prioritize fewer vulnerabilities. So instead of the 52% of vulnerabilities that would be critical and high because of some of the properties that we spoke about earlier, they're in malware campaigns, they're weaponized, they're being used by threat actors. That narrows that window down to about 7% of vulnerabilities instead of that larger gap. Those are the ones that materially that we identified that those would move the needle on risk the most. And the QDS score, there's the Qualys detection score, where we assign a value to every CVE in the NVD, regardless of if we have a detection for it or not. So whenever we do have detections for them, we recalculate that score on a daily basis. And that's an index for the likelihood of exploit based on multiple factors that I spoke about before. So overall, by switching over and moving to a risk-based vulnerability management program, we've seen customers enjoy 70% in real risk reduction and 75% of fewer resources required. So not necessarily, it gives you some of these resources the ability to start pursuing more valuable things for the business to tackle new things instead of spending time on spreadsheets and running calculations. And same with the manual effort with the automation that we had to take vulnerabilities out of Qualys and putting into ServiceNow and use the business processes and the report power of ServiceNow simplifies a lot of that pipeline. All right, and ultimately what we want to do is eliminate risk. One of the desired outcome is risk elimination, and a lot of vulnerability debt we find is due to third-party software. So if you have example for SCCM, it's really good at Microsoft vulnerabilities, But where it gets a little soft is some of the other vulnerabilities that we're identifying in the environment and that need to be patched like on a daily basis, like Chrome and Firefox or Adobe, or some of these common softwares that are high maintenance that need to be remediated. And this is something that we do offer as well as a patch management product to be able to quickly use automation to identify. Let's say, for instance, I want to just take all my Chrome and Firefox updates, and every time a new vulnerability comes out that or new patch is introduced, I want to go ahead and push that. So you can that could be orchestrated remotely, or maybe even necessarily it may just fill a gap from where you're at with your current patching tools, or potentially maybe be the dedicated patching tool in your environment. We find that customers that use patch management enjoy about a 46% reduction in mean time to remediation. All right. So this is, I want to go over the CISO maturity model. I think it ties together a lot of what I mentioned here. In the beginning, the way this starts off, so we're looking from left to right and then right to left and left to right. So it's supposed to be a snake, but didn't come through quite well on the slide here. But we start off with getting that asset inventory. That's that internal asset inventory, and then bringing in our external perspective and be able to augment that with potentially some CMDB synchronization. The CMDB synchronization, we could enrich the CMDB with information that Qualys has, or the CMDB in a bidirectional can give us additional business information that the CMDB team and associated teams have already applied to the CIs that are there. Tell me where the critical business apps are in Qualys, so I can enhance my scoring for the true risk algorithm to give us a little bit better information as to what we should be actioning on. And as a result, and I mentioned the CMDB can be enriched with all the information, because more often than not, we find that tools like Qualys have more visibility throughout the network because of our mandate to scan everything in some organizations than the mid servers do from a discovery perspective for CMDB. So from a CMDB, we could use us as a bootstrap or use to identify gaps and enrich the CMDB with information around hardware inventory, software inventory, the end of life and service, certificates, open ports. And once we get that kind of set up, we'll get that basic great foundation. Then let's use the VMDR tool, the vulnerability management tool, to go and identify the risk items. And then let's get the information to our remediation owners through the ITSM integration. Cloud security is also something that is, so some organizations are completely in the cloud, or they're a little bit of both. And we offer the tools for that as well. We look at things from a CWP perspective, the cloud workload protection, where we're just looking at basically instances that are spun up there, the EC2 or Azure instances or GCP instances. Or what we also offer is cloud security posture monitoring. That's be able to look at the various objects or services that you're using from these public cloud providers and monitoring them to make sure that they are configured securely or identify them so that they can be remediated or set in a more secure fashion, right? So if an S3 bucket, that whole level of personal data went public, I think that's something that we'd want to definitely jump on and be able to get on top of pretty quickly. We also offer comprehensive view of container security as well. So that's also part of that unified asset inventory, at least from the beginning, to understand what images are being deployed, but also be able to get that vulnerability telemetry from that system as well. And I spoke earlier about the remediation and patch management. We offer patch management as a way to quickly respond to those vulnerabilities or identify those vulnerabilities that require a patch and apply that and get those updated. We also have what's called custom remediation, where you can build scripts to apply configuration changes. So think of like web servers or TLS servers, or maybe SSH configurations, where you can change the ciphers that are used on a Linux server or something along those lines. We also have EDR, extended detection response, where if we find a malignant process, we can quarantine that process, move to the side, and we can even tell you specifically what vulnerability was exploited on the asset, which led to that compromise as well. Compliance is a two-box thing here. We have secure configuration analysis slash what we call policy compliance, where based on the policy framework that you may be governed by, whether you've self-elected through NIST or maybe it's PCI or one of the industry-leading controlled certifications, we can use our policy compliance or secure configuration utility to use like CIS benchmarks to evaluate how well the system is being secured or based on best practices. And usually sometimes just that alone, bringing down or reducing that attack surface goes a long way to reducing that the vulnerability exposure that you have from that asset, and be able to roll this up and then report to these bodies, these governing bodies, whether it be internal or your external auditors, will also be beneficial as well. And the last slide here is similar to Maslow's hierarchy needs, but we're talking about the CISO's hierarchy needs or any senior leadership that how things would kind of work here, right? And we go from starting locally with what you have and going all the way to building a positive relationship with the IT folks, right? Because in cyber, we can identify this stuff, but we don't have necessarily the means to go and remediate it, depending on the size of the business. But more often than not, that's usually the case. There's kind of a separation of duties. So from a cyber perspective, we can use a tool like Qualys to get our house in order, to build that inventory, both internal and external. Do the vulnerability management, have a good cloud security posture in place. And then we can operationalize that on top of that. We perform the EDR to do the more runtime analysis and be more proactive. Same with our, we have CDR, cloud detection response. We're proactively using AI to identify potential threats such as lateral movement within the cloud, and do regulatory compliance and do our CMDB seeking through an cybersecurity operationalization standpoint. From an IT perspective, again, we're now taking this out of IT, out of cybersecurity, and bringing it to our IT partners, and we are helping them by potentially giving the ability to use the tool to quickly respond to the security vulnerabilities by patching them, or being able just to position them in more of the place for success, to extend the vulnerability detections or risk items to them through our ITSM integration. And through the ITSM integration, we can set SLAs to encourage them to focus on certain risk items from a prioritization standpoint than others that they can take a little bit longer to remediate. And overall, what we want to achieve is a good positive relationship between IT and security for effective overall reporting of our information technology suite. Here, when we hear back from CISOs, the top challenges facing them today is maintaining an effective security posture, the shortage of cybersecurity talent, and the threat of sophisticated cybersecurity threats. And looking at things from a holistic perspective and putting the right tooling in place ensures that you have you're paving a road to success for securing your organization from end to end. Is the dashboard for VMDR. This is one that we're hallmarking from a true risk perspective, something that I would imagine that a senior stakeholder may be interested in. And here, so for instance, these widgets are completely customizable, and you could build your own from scratch or use some of the ones that we have out of the box here. But this is one that we have out of the box that that gives you a place to begin with true risk. So for instance, this one is a roll-up of your whole cybersecurity risk view from across the board. This widget here demonstrates your cloud posture. What's the external attack surface look like? And this is an example of what would a business unit look like, or what does all my critical apps look like? So this kind of gives you an overall view of what these look like. And we click over here to vulnerabilities. We see that there are a list of our assets, and each of the assets has a true risk score associated with it. And this true risk score is based on a roll-up of all the vulnerabilities and the items that we found, or risky items that we found associated with that asset, and it's multiplied by this criticality column here. If I pull this up here, we see that you could assign the asset criticality score by asset tag. And if there's multiple here that all had different numbers, we would honor the highest number, and that would factor into your true risk score. So for example, we look at the risk calculation here. It's a little scary when you look at it, but it's transparent in the sense that we give you exact breakdown of how we come to this number to begin with. So for instance, we look down here towards the bottom of the view. All the vulnerabilities are listed with their Qualys detection score, and they're averaged out and multiplied times this business criticality to get this true risk score. So right off the bat, I see my top risk factors for this asset. 4 of the vulnerabilities are on the CISA known exploitable list. 2 of them have associated threat actors. 8 have weaponized vulnerabilities, and 71 have proof of concept exploit maturity vulns. So I definitely have a little bit of work ahead of me to go through to remediate this. Of course, in our demo environment, we have some pretty things that are severely unpatched for demonstration purposes. And we can also demonstrate or set a score for a customized score for missing required software, or if there's unauthorized software on the box as well that could potentially be raising the risk, and that gets rolled into your score as well. So that's at an asset level, but if I want to look from a specific vulnerability level, we'll look for anything that has a score of 90, and one of my favorite ones, blue. I look at this vulnerability here, and I look at the details, and keep in mind that we're on a daily basis, we are taking all those 29 sources of threat intelligence and combining them with this vulnerability information that we have, and we're setting a criticality score, or this Qualys detection score. So for instance, this is the Blue Keep vulnerability from way back in the day. It's got a CVSS score of 10. It has an exploit code maturity weaponized and proof of concept, and it has this malware associated with it in these threat actors, and it is on the CISA known exploitable list. So this is definitely one that will bubble up to the top of your remediation plans. Now, one question that I do get a lot too is, how does that relate to CVSS? Well, it's possible that you could have a high CVSS score, or a low CVSS score, but still high QDS score, or the other way around, right? So I'm going to give you an example of that here. So this query that I'm running now are all vulnerabilities with a low CVSS score, but a high QDS score. So we've rated the vulnerability higher based on the threat intelligence that we've received. So if I do a little bit closer look at this, I see this has a CVSS score of 6.5, but this vulnerability is weaponized and has a proof of concept, and it's on the CISA known exploitable list. It's very possible that this, because of the CVSS score, will go into the radar, or maybe even underneath the risk appetite of some organizations, and this one could get missed. And all it takes is one vulnerability to make all the difference. And I think that was probably, based on what the time that I have left, I think that's one of the kind of high level I wanted to show you in terms of how it is that you can measure the risk and then communicate it like a dashboard like this, and then eventually take action and remediate the risk through identifying and knowing what's here and what to take action on.
That's great, Russ. Really appreciate that. We have a few questions actually that just came through here in the chat. So the first one is, how do I begin to operationalize the risk and put this into action?
That's a great question. To begin to operationalize the true risk, right? So one of the challenges some of the customers that we encounter have is that their CDB is probably not in good shape. And we find that in a lot of cases. And that's one of the engines that we use to be able to update the asset criticality to help train that true risk score. So what we're finding is that being able to leverage the QDS, the Qualys detection score, where we're combining the threat intelligence with that vulnerability as a means to at least prioritize vulnerabilities or start to make that shift from a maturity standpoint. You know, when they say, like, when somebody asks you, how do you eat an elephant? You got to say one bite at a time. You got to crawl, walk, run. And maybe implementing all this stuff all at one time, it might be too much. It's important to kind of start off, build confidence with the smaller process and build up. So if today you're using CVSS or you're using Qualys severity to prioritize vulnerabilities, we're looking to potentially pull that QDS score in as an index alongside of those severities and use that as a way to quickly quantify the threat intelligence. Not necessarily using an ISAC or maybe the cyber threat intelligence teams. I mean, they're probably doing an amazing job of coming down and saying, hey, we've got some hot ones here. These threat actors are going after our vertical, these types of vulnerabilities, and sometimes they'll get there's some in there that are especially new, but that doesn't really necessarily, the ones that are older vulnerabilities don't always come up on that level of visibility. So it's important to be able to look at what's already being identified from a threat perspective and prioritize using something like the Qualys detection score for that prioritization. So that is something that can be used today, and that's something that comes with VMDR, and that's something even from the API perspective you can pull in if you have a downstream process such as ServiceNow, or you're pulling it into a database using Tableau or Power BI to visualize it. All that stuff is something that all VMDR customers can use today.
Excellent. There's another question here as well. So how do I know I'm covering all the critical assets and that essentially that you have everything you need covered, scanned, etc.?
Right. The breadth of coverage is the key that I mentioned earlier. It's about ensuring that you have everything in your inventory, whether it's through CMDB discovery, using a tool like even Qualys. Whenever we perform scans of those IP ranges, there may not be active assets on every single IP out there, but part of that is the discovery process that we use each and every scan that we do. We identify what hosts are live, and whatever hosts are live, we move to the next step, and that's actually doing the full vulnerability scan and pulling that information and then including that into our overall asset inventory. So you do that from your on-prem network, your public cloud networks by creating connectors between our tool and the public cloud interface and pulling all that data in, and pulling that information in. We're introducing Active Directory integration as well, where you can pull the information out of Active Directory, and even more tools to broaden your focus on all the potential assets, and including external attack surface management as well. There are some firms out there that specialize in external attack surface management, but they're really doing it from the posture of third-party risk. They're not necessarily external attack surface management providers in that sense, but what we're offering is we want to make sure that you have complete visibility of your enterprise for everything on-prem and potentially external that's associated with your organization.
Oh, that's excellent, Ross. I want to close out by appreciating your time here today. I know you're very busy. You do a lot of these webinars, and the fact that you could compress 10,000 hours of your intellect into 60 minutes, we really appreciate it. I want to close out with the audience and tell them thank you so much for your time today. If anybody is interested in inquiring further on VMDR, on Qualys, and how Stratejum can be the operational arm to this technology, please do send me an email. I'm going to put it in the chat here. So it's nisreen.chams@stratejum.com. That's Nisreen with a double S. It is showing as a single S here, not sure why. But in the chat there, send me an email and I can connect you with the appropriate individual. Any of our customers that are on the line today, we'd be more than happy to set you up for a demo, a POC of the patch management services of any module in the tech stack. But with that being said, I want to appreciate everyone's time again and wishing everybody a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks for joining today.